welcome everybody to another episode of Mom Street USA. I am your host, Jackie, and on today's episode, we are talking about Disney transportation. Now, when you hear that, you may not think that that has enough to be an entire podcast episode, but don't you worry. Don't you worry. I've got plenty of notes for today. And the goal is to kind of explain it in a way that is beneficial to families that are visiting, right? Because getting around Disney can be so confusing. There are so many options, and some places can only be reached by specific transportation modes. So today we're going to break down all of the transportation options, and then I'm going to give you some parenting information and notes and tips for each, things that you might want to keep in mind when you're traveling with kiddos around Disney World property, because not all of the transportation at Walt Disney World is created equal, especially if you are considering traveling with littles, traveling with a stroller, traveling with a large family. All of those aspects can really affect how and what transportation you want to use. So, we're going to talk about kind of all of the different forms of transportation, and I'll give you all the details of those as we go through. So we are going to start today with the buses. These I feel like are the most well-known Disney transportation method that there is. But every Disney resort has buses to some or all of the parks. This is the standard way to get around when you're staying on Disney property. The way that the bus stops work at the resorts really depends on the resort. Some resorts are going to have one main bus stop near the main building that serves the entire resort. Others are going to have kind of that, but also like central bus routes that you can take to get to different parts of the resort. So the bigger resorts actually have internal loops of their buses. And with those, they kind of cycle through all of the different stops and then take you to the parks. So, just for your knowledge, like I said, generally speaking, most resorts just have one main bus stop that you're going to have to figure out your walking distance to get to. But the following Disney resorts have multiple bus stops within their grounds. So, just something to note. Caribbean Beach Resort, Coronado Springs, Port Orleans, Riverside, Fort Wilderness, Old Key West, and Saratoga Springs. All of those are going to be the resorts that have that multi-stop bus system inside. Now, sometimes you will also see from the parks side of buses that some of the resorts will share bus stops from time to time. So places like Yacht and Beach Club, because they're directly next to each other, they may share a bus stop at the parks when you're going to leave the parks to go back to the resort. Same thing with the Magic Kingdom area. So Grand Floridian, Polynesian, and Contemporary, they will sometimes all share a bus route also. Same thing for Wilderness Lodge and Fort Wilderness. So don't be alarmed if you see that. It's just simply because there are already so many buses and bus routes that run on Disney property. So when they can consolidate and combine, they do try to do that. So again, the buses run from the resorts to the parks and from the parks to the resorts. The buses also will run from park to park starting around 10 a.m. So if you're looking to park hop, you're not going to be able to do that via bus until around 10 a.m. And that's not a hard 10 a.m. It's not like 10 a.m. the bus is going to be parked in that spot ready to go. It could be 10, it could be 10:15, so it's not like a hard 10 a.m. on that. And then also do note there are no resort to resort buses. So that is the hardest way to get around using Disney transportation is if you are trying to go from a resort to another resort. So let's say you're staying at All-Star Music, you have a dining reservation at the Polynesian. You're not going to be able to take a bus directly from your resort at All Stars to the Polynesian. You're going to have to go to a park before you can get to the other resort. So do keep that in mind if you are looking at your transportation for your trip and planning out how you're going to get where you need to go and thinking about how much time you need to get to where you need to go. I always tell people that the buses, while they are fairly reliable, and it has gotten better during the pandemic and right after, buses were really tricky because they weren't running as many, they weren't letting as many people on the buses. The buses have gotten more consistent over the last couple years to where they do typically come every 15 to 20 minutes. Now, that being said, if you're in a super long line, you may have to wait for another bus because the bus that pulls up, you may not be able to get on if it gets full to capacity, right? So you always want to leave a minimum of an hour to get to where you're trying to go if you're doing the buses. So if you're trying to get to rope drop, if you're trying to get from to a dining reservation, any of those reasons why you may be going across Disney property, at least an hour, if not more. If you're going resort to resort and you have to take multiple buses or multiple modes of transportation, that's something else to consider when you're leaving yourself enough time. So let's talk about where the bus stops are at the parks. Again, at your resort, you're just going to have to look and see on the map or look. Disney does a really nice job on their website of showing the amenities and all of that for each resort. So you can likely find a map on there that will show you where the bus stops are, or just a quick Google for your resort. But let's talk about the bus stops at the parks because this is something just to note that they are usually fairly close to the front, but occasionally you may have a little bit of a distance to walk. So at Magic Kingdom, the buses are up front, and if you're looking at the entrance, they're on the right-hand side. At Epcot, same thing. They are at the front of the park to the right of the entrance as you're looking at it. For Hollywood Studios, it can be a little deceiving because you actually have to pass the Skyliner, which we'll talk about the Skyliner here in a little bit. But you have to pass the Skyliner entrance that is kind of straight ahead out of the park, and then they're going to be on the left. And then at Animal Kingdom, they are in the front, also to the left of the entrance there. So again, just making sure you understand where you're going and where to find those bus stops can be really helpful. So, as you are leaving the parks, if you are trying to get back to your resort or you're trying to get to another resort because you're going to resort hop or check out the sites somewhere else, when you get to the first entrance of the bus stop area, they're going to have these big, huge signs. And on that sign, they're going to have all of the resorts listed, and then they're going to tell you what bus stop number you need to go to. So, don't worry if you're like, "I have no idea where to go." They have that sign, and also, typically, there is a security officer or a cast member that is standing nearby as you kind of enter those pathways, because what typically happens as you are going to go back to the resorts is there are usually, 3 or 4 rows of bus stops that you can take. So when you approach that area, where that sign is situated is going to be kind of like a fork in the road. So you're going to need to know, do I need to go left to go to this row, or do I need to go right to go to this row? Do I need to go all the way to the end to go to that row? So those are all laid out for you. They're all very easy to see, which is really nice. I will say one note about the bus stops. Typically speaking, deluxe resorts have better dibs on location of their bus stops. So they're typically going to be closer to the park or closer to the entrance of where the bus stops start. And unfortunately, it kind of trickles down to your value resorts typically, not always, have the furthest away bus stops, unfortunately. So that's just the way it works. But that is kind of just a little note about if you don't know what bus stop to go to, there will be a sign or somebody that you can ask for help. So don't fret about that. Just a note about off-property resorts, because do keep in mind that everything we've talked about so far has been for Disney resorts if you're staying on property. But off-property resorts often do also have buses. But keep in mind that these buses usually do not drop you off at the same place that the Disney buses do. So they're going to have a separate bus area that you will have to go for these shuttles. Also, some of these off-property resorts may only run to one or two parks each day. So be sure if you're staying off-property to double check about the parks buses when you book and also when you check in. So that way you aren't surprised when you get there, right? You don't want to be planning to go to Animal Kingdom, but the day that you're going, your off-property resort only is running shuttles to Epcot or Magic Kingdom, right? So it just gets a little more complicated from there. So keep that in mind if you're looking off property, you may end up needing to pay for transportation, which then may or may not offset what you saved staying off property, if you kind of catch my vibe with that. Because typically speaking, if you have one of those resorts that doesn't go to every park, you're gonna be paying to do an Uber or Lyft, something along the means of that. So, again, just note about that. Also note that the, Magic Kingdom drop-off for off-property resorts is actually the Ticketed Transportation Center. So, it's not even at Magic Kingdom like the Disney buses do. So again, you get dropped off, you then have to take a monorail or a ferry boat, which we'll talk about those in a little bit, but just not nearly as convenient as the on-property Disney buses, especially for Magic Kingdom. Now, a couple notes about the buses before we move on and chat about some of the other transportation options. And these are just like things that I've learned from taking all of these transportation modes and things that I would suggest and like things to note if you're a parent trying to navigate this. For the buses, all strollers, no matter what shape or kind or makeup, must be folded up in order to board the bus. So you're not going to be able to leave your kiddo sitting in their stroller, leave your sleeping baby in the stroller. They are going to need to be taken out so that way you can fold that stroller up because there's just not a ton of room on those buses and they want to get as many people as they possibly can on those buses, especially first thing in the morning and last thing at night. Just again, another parent note on these buses, there are obviously no seat belts or any kind of restraints. Now, that doesn't matter in a sense that like Florida does not require your toddlers to have a car seat on these buses because it's considered public transportation, right? But just a note that if you've got a couple kiddos with you, you want to be smart about how you situate them so they're not like hopping up and down or crawling all over the seats, typical toddler behavior. So just a mental note about that. Something else to consider also is as you're waiting in line for the bus, the later you get on a bus, so, like, if you're one of the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 people on the bus, the more likely you are that you're gonna have to stand, right? So, they have seats on the bus, but then they have a ton of standing room in the aisle. So, the later you get on the bus, the more likely you are to have to stand. So, consider this when you're boarding with little ones. It may be worth the stress and the hassle to just wait. You may say, no, I think we can handle it. And you may get on the bus. And usually, 9 times out of 10, if an able bodied adult sees kiddos that are standing, they're usually going to give up their seat, right? I've been there before where I had a seat next to my kids. They were old enough to handle it. So I gave up my seat for another kid and I just stood right in front of them, right? Definitely still super close to where my kiddos were. But just keep that in mind if you are one of the last groups to get on a particular bus. Just a piece of advice that I have about the buses is when you have more than one adult and you're able to, you gotta divide and conquer. So, like, what we typically would do is when the bus pulls up, we would be ready to I would take the kids and the bag or the backpack or whatever we had that we needed to hold, and then my husband would do the stroller, and he would fold it up and be the one getting on and off the bus with that, and I would have the kids with me. So, you definitely wanna have a plan for what you're doing with that. Like, when we went with my extended family, last May, we went to get on the buses and because my kids are older and they know the buses, they know how to handle it. We were with my nieces who were, uh, not quite 1 and not quite 5 when we went. So with my sister and her husband, I would just say, "Hey, give me the baby." And I would just hold her and she would be my responsibility when we got on the bus. That way they could handle their older kiddo and the stroller. My kiddos were fine. We didn't have a stroller for my kiddos, so like it was good to just kind of divide and conquer. So if you're able to, that's super helpful. If not, and you need help, you just got to ask for it, right? Ask a friendly person that you're standing in line with. Ask the bus driver if you need help, just like lifting your stroller up into the bus. See if they're able to help grab that and lift it up so that way you have some help with that because it can be stressful, but it doesn't have to be if you can be just an advocate for yourself. Something else to note in my last little tidbit about the buses is for some kiddos that visit Disney World, these buses are just an absolute brand new, super cool experience and a huge plus to visiting Disney. My kids on previous trips have gotten mad and upset when we don't take the bus and we opt to drive to the parks instead. I can distinctly remember a couple trips ago, this was probably 3 years ago, we stayed at Port Orleans French Quarter, and we typically just drove because it was just easier. The buses there were fine, but our car was, like, even closer to us than the bus stop was, so we're like, "We're just gonna drive." But, like, there were days where they were like, "Can we take the bus, please? It's so much more fun when we get to take the bus." So, for some kiddos, that is something to think about and to remember. The other thing that I will mention again about the buses is if you've got kiddos that are prone to falling asleep in the car, they're gonna fall asleep on that bus. So situate them in a way that is comfortable and that you are going to be successful getting off the bus with a sleeping child on your hip, right? So these are just little things to think ahead about as you are kind of figuring out how to navigate the buses, but hopefully that will give you some insight and kind of give you a leg up as you are planning for bus transportation at Disney. So let's talk about now a different form of transportation. So from the ground to the sky, let's talk about the monorail. The monorail is such an iconic mode of transportation at Disney. I feel like you can't think about Epcot or Magic Kingdom without thinking about the monorail. So the monorail at Disney serves three different resorts and then the two parks that I just mentioned, Magic Kingdom and Epcot. Now, the thing that confuses people the most about the monorail is there are three different monorail lines. So there is a chance that depending on your starting point and your ending point, that you will have to change tracks in the middle of your journey. So three different monorail lines. There is the resort monorail, the express monorail, and then the Epcot monorail. So the resort monorail has four different stops, technically five locations, but once you get on it, then it's four different stops, right? But the locations that it stops at are the TTC, which is the Transportation and Ticket Center. That is essentially the parking lot of Magic Kingdom. The Polynesian Resort, the Grand Floridian Resort, Magic Kingdom, and then the Contemporary. So those five locations are where the monorail is going to visit. This monorail typically runs clockwise around Seven Seas Lagoon. It sometimes does reverse and go the other way. There's really no rhyme or reason to why they do that, but, like, I know earlier this year, even in 2026, like, in the spring, there were news articles about they reversed the direction of the monorails. Sometimes they go opposite, sometimes they go the same around Magic Kingdom. You're just gonna have to keep an eye out and look and see. But that means that they are going in that order that I just listed. So if you're getting on at the Ticket and Transportation Center, you're gonna go to the Polynesian first, then the Grand Floridian, then Magic Kingdom, then the Contemporary. So that's the order that you're gonna go. Now, this monorail loop is best for guests that are staying at those monorail resorts or guests that are wanting to take in the views and resort hop at those monorail resorts. So if one of those are you, then this is the monorail loop that you're going to want to take. Let's talk about the express monorail. This monorail is the quickest way to get from the TTC to Magic Kingdom. That's why it's called the Express Monorail. Only two stops on this one. It starts at the Ticket and Transportation Center and then goes directly to Magic Kingdom and then back again. So just those two stops on that one. This is best for guests that are arriving to Magic Kingdom via the TTC. So that would be if you're driving and parking at Magic Kingdom for the day, or if you have a non-Disney resort bus, like we talked about earlier with the buses, that is bringing you to Magic Kingdom for the day, it's going to drop you off at the TTC. So if you are arriving to Magic Kingdom via the TTC for whatever reason, this express monorail is the best option for you. The other monorail loop is the one that services Epcot. So it is the Epcot monorail. It's got two stops one being the TTC, and then one being the Epcot monorail station that is directly out front, the front gates of Epcot. This is best for guests that are traveling from Magic Kingdom to Epcot, obviously, or Epcot to Magic Kingdom. Now, do keep in mind, this is one of those instances where you are going to have to change monorails. So if you have visited Magic Kingdom for the morning and you want to hop to Epcot for lunch, let's say you're going to go grab some festival food at World Showcase, from Magic Kingdom, you are going to need to take a monorail to the TTC. So that would be either the express monorail or the resort monorail, which I'll talk more about that comment in just a minute. So let's say you jump on the express monorail, you go to the TTC, you get off of the express monorail, and then you have to get on the Epcot monorail. That Epcot monorail will then take you to Epcot. It kind of loops around, which is a really fun view. You get to be able to look down in the parks and see a little bit of I like it especially during Flower and Garden when they have all the topiaries and all the flower beds are all beautifully vibrant and full of, gorgeous flowers, but it takes you kind of around the front part of Epcot to that station. So Magic Kingdom to Epcot is 2 monorails. Same thing in reverse, right? The Epcot monorail, if you're leaving Epcot and going to Magic Kingdom, Epcot monorail to the TTC, and then from the TTC, you take one of those transportation options to get over to Magic Kingdom. Another reason that you could take that Epcot monorail is just if you're kind of transportation hopping, right? So let's say your end goal is to get from Magic Kingdom to Port Orleans Riverside. But you don't just wanna get on a bus to go there. You wanna take the monorail, you wanna take the monorail through Epcot once because you've never done it before. So, like, that would be another reason that you could do it. Not the best way, obviously, to get from a park to a resort, but definitely an option if that's something that you're looking to do. With these 3 monorail loops, please, again, keep in mind that they all merge at the TTC. So the TTC is the central hub location for all 3 monorails, so you've gotta double check your signs before you go up the ramp to hop on. The good thing is they are very well marked. So if you're arriving at the TTC, you're going through security, you come through the plaza where you have the monorail directly in front of you, you're gonna see the, overhead signs that say where the monorail is going, and it's gonna show you exactly what you need. The 2 you're gonna see in front of you are going to be the Epcot one and the express one. Then down to the left, I believe it is a little bit of the ways, is the resort one if you need to hop on that one. So they're all very clearly marked. You just have to make sure you're paying attention to that signage when you get to the TTC. A couple notes and parent tips for taking the monorails. If you are going with a stroller, one of the nice things about this is that strollers can remain out and your children can remain in their strollers when you are taking the monorail to and from. So that is a nice little perk. However, I will note that if you have parked at the TTC and you are taking the monorail from Magic Kingdom to get back to the TTC, in order to take the parking tram, you have to fold your stroller up. So you're out of the woods for a little bit. And if you can walk to your car, you'll be fine with if you have like a sleeping kiddo. But if not, just a note about that. Another note about the monorail is that some of the seats do face backwards. So, depending on which direction the monorail is coming and going, some of them are forward riding, some of them are backwards riding. So, if that bothers anyone in your group, just a mental note about that to pay attention to which direction the train pulls into the monorail station. So that way you know which side of your monorail car is going to be facing forward. If that monorail is full with the seats, you may end up standing and holding on to the silver poles like you would on the buses as well. So another note about that. The hardest thing with that is if the monorail is really full, is finding a spot for a stroller, right? So just be patient. Check the ends. The cast members can also help you kind of figure out if there's a good spot. You may need to split up if you've got like an older kid and 2 adults that you can divide out to fit. There's lots of different scenarios with that, but just keep in mind that there is a lot of standing room on the monorail as well. Just a note that anyone who frequents the monorail also knows is There's not a lot of ventilation in there, so if you are visiting Disney World during the heat of the summer, later in the day, the monorail has a bit of an odor to it, so just be prepared for that. But always do also keep in mind that if you are trying to take the monorail to get to the TTC from Magic Kingdom, you can take either the resort monorail or the express monorail. So either one will get you there. You will find, especially at night, the cast members that are stationed at the monorail station, like after fireworks, will be telling people, like, hey, both monorails will get you to the TTC. Like, take both of them because they want to divide out those lines. But if that's not happening and you see that the express monorail line is really, 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 really long, but the resort monorail line is like a third of that, get on the resort monorail. Will it take you a few extra stops? Yes, but it's totally worth it. Either way, it's super fun to ride through the Contemporary on that monorail, so no complaints there. So let's talk about boat transportation. I feel like this is one of the transportation methods that not a lot of people realize is available at Disney unless it's one that you frequent yourself because of where you're staying, right? So not every resort and every park has boat transportation to get to it. So we'll talk about which resorts have it here in a moment, but do keep in mind that like Animal Kingdom does not have any boat transportation to get to it. Unfortunately, you're stuck with buses only on that one. But the other three parks, Magic Kingdom, Epcot, and Hollywood Studios, all do have some boat transportation. So keep that in mind when if you are someone that's like, oh, I'd really like to take a boat because I've never done it before. That's where like a lot of this comes into my list. Like I took a boat last trip between Epcot and Hollywood Studios because I'd never taken it before and I just wanted to see what it was like. So to me, that is part of the reason why people take the boats because they like it. They want to slow down. They want to see the sights and they've never done it before. Because the boats as a whole do tend to run slower than the buses. But of course, they're absolutely more scenic if you are viewing things from the water. So let's talk about the different boat locations and we're going to base this on the parks that they run to and from. So we're going to start with Magic Kingdom. Magic Kingdom has several different boat options. All of the boat launches and docks are going to be straight ahead as you exit the park. So the buses like we talked about, if you're leaving the park, the train station's behind you, the buses are going to be to your left, the monorail is going to be to your right, and the boats are going to sit smack dab in between those two. The main boat that you will see at the Magic Kingdom is the ferry boat. This ferry boat runs directly between the TTC and Magic Kingdom. So this is the alternative to the monorail. So if that monorail line is looking insanely long and crazy, the ferry boat might be a really great option. So again, it's straight ahead as you're leaving. If you're trying to get from the TTC to Magic Kingdom, as you get to like the main plaza where you're looking at the monorail, if you go down to the left, you'll see the ferry boat launch down there. So it is just straight a shuttle across Seven Seas Lagoon to take you between the TTC and Magic Kingdom. I like the ferry boat a lot. It's nice. It has a really high capacity. You can fit a ton of people on that boat, and there's usually a nice breeze. So that's a benefit for that. A couple of the other boat launches that you can find at Magic Kingdom are one that will go to the Grand Floridian and the Polynesian, and one that will go to Wilderness Lodge and Fort Wilderness. So there are in total 4 routes of smaller boats in the Magic Kingdom area. And each of these is going to be designated by different signage at the boat launch and then a different colored flag on the boats. And you'll see this across all of the rest of the boat routes that we're going to talk about, is that they all have a different colored flag on them. So the routes for these typically run every 20 to 30 minutes. And they typically open about 30 minutes before park opening and will go until 90 minutes after park close. So just to give you kind of a rundown of what boat launches there are, the Gold Flag launch carries guests from Magic Kingdom to the Grand Floridian and then continues to the Polynesian and then returns to Magic Kingdom. The green launch carries guests from Magic Kingdom to Fort Wilderness and then back again. The red launch will carry guests from Magic Kingdom to Wilderness Lodge and then back again. And then the blue launch consists of kind of two different sub launches. Because it will take you between Wilderness Lodge, Fort Wilderness, and the Contemporary. So take a look at that one if those are where you want to go from there. Now, do keep in mind that you can hop on any of these boats at any of their stops. So if you just want to go over to check out the Grand Floridian and maybe you want to take a boat instead of taking the monorail, you can do that. And then you can take the same boat route back from the Grand Floridian back to the Magic Kingdom. You just have to stop at the Polynesian in between. So at any point in any of these routes, you can hop on the boats and get to any of those locations. Now, over at Epcot and Hollywood Studios, there are a couple different kinds of boat routes that you can take. The first is the friendship boats that go outside of the park. So this is the boat dock that you see if you are leaving Epcot out the International Gateway, heading kind of towards the boardwalk. It's directly across from the Skyliner, which we'll talk about the Skyliner very soon. But it's directly across from the Skyliner. So this one goes between Epcot and Hollywood Studios. This is the boat I took on my last trip, and I liked it. It was fun. It stops in between if you're starting at Epcot, it stops at the boardwalk, the beach club, the yacht club, and the dolphin and swan. So all of those are going to be able to use that boat transportation. And then after it visits the dolphin and the swan, it will go on to Hollywood Studios and then switch that and reverse it, right? If you're going from Hollywood Studios to Epcot. Where it drops you off at Hollywood Studios is kind of the corner around from where the Skyliner is, across the water from the buses. So it's kind of a hidden boat dock off to the side, out front of the Hollywood Studios entrance gate there. So those are the kind of external outside of the park friendship boats, but there are also friendship boats that run inside of Epcot. So inside of Epcot in World Showcase, there are two different routes that these friendship boats will take. And they are the only transportation method that you can take to get between the countries and the pavilions of World Showcase without just walking. So they run across World Showcase in two different routes. They both originate in World Showcase Plaza. World Showcase Plaza is kind of the entrance area to World Showcase as you leave World Celebration and go towards all of the different country pavilions. So they originate from there. One of them goes then to Morocco and back, so directly back and forth between the two. And the other one goes to Germany and back directly between the two, which I didn't even realize that there were two of these until my last trip. And someone in my live chat when I was live streaming at the parks told me that there were two different boat launches across World Showcase Lagoon. I had no idea. I thought there was only one, but there are two. So Morocco and Germany are your two spots that you can get to via those boats. Those boats I don't recommend for being a time saver. I do recommend them for being a foot saver, right? If you need to get to the other side of World Showcase, your feet are just done, you need a break, you'd like to sit on a boat for a few minutes to get there instead of walking half a mile, I do suggest those for that. Another boat option that you can look at is actually not in a park. It is at Disney Springs. And now the boats at Disney Springs have been the topic of debate and rumor and new policy over the last couple weeks as I'm recording this. So as it sits currently, water transportation from Disney Springs to the resorts is only for resort guests and guests that have a dining or activity reservation at that resort. So unfortunately, if you're just trying to resort hop, the Disney Springs boats are no longer an option. So take that for what it is. Remember that so you don't get stuck. Also, I didn't touch on buses at Disney Springs again because this has been topic of debate, but the Disney Springs buses are operating the same way. So you cannot take a bus from Disney Springs to a resort without being a resort guest or having a dining reservation. However, if you are someone that is eligible to take the boats at Disney Springs, their water transportation is typically offered daily from about 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 p.m. So a half hour on either end of the operating hours of Disney Springs, usually. There are several different routes that run to and from Disney Springs. So if you are somebody that is staying at one of these resorts, these are great options for you to be able to get to Disney Springs. The yellow route is the Sassagoula River cruise that runs to and from Port Orleans French Quarter and Riverside. The green route runs to and from Old Key West. The blue route runs to and from Saratoga Springs. Now, currently, all of these boat routes are running from the Marketplace dock, which is down like past the Christmas store and past the end of like World of Disney around that side. Previously, there were 3 docks at Disney Springs that they would use, and there used to be a red route that would run between the West Side, the Landing, and Marketplace. However, it doesn't seem that those are operational at the moment, and that it looks to be online that every resort boat is using that Marketplace dock. I could be wrong. I haven't physically gone and looked at the dock to check and see, but that seems to be what it looks like from the maps and information that I can find online. So let's talk about a few parent notes and tips for the different boat transportation that you may be considering taking. Strollers will typically need to be folded up on the smaller boats. The ferry boats, they do not have to be folded up on. So if you're going from the TTC to Magic Kingdom or vice versa, you can just wheel that stroller straight on, leave your kiddos in it, and be good to go. But on the smaller boats, I would suggest having a plan to fold them up because it makes more room for other passengers as you're traveling back and forth between resorts and parks. Also, be mindful if you let your kiddo pick your seats. A lot of these boats have like an interior where there are seats and then like an outside area where there are seats. And you don't necessarily want to get stuck outside in the sun on a hot afternoon in Florida. So be mindful of that. Maybe guide them to an interior if it's available and if you are able to for that. And just my personal note, and I mentioned this earlier, I prefer the ferry boat at the end of the day from Magic Kingdom. It's got a much higher capacity. It's a faster load. It's got a better breeze. And I also just in general love the boat transportation around Disney. I think it gives you such a unique look at so many of the different sites that you typically see from a different perspective. So I really like the boat transportation. But if you are going from resort to park or park to resort, the boats are definitely not the fastest. They're the prettiest, but they're not the fastest. So let's talk about the Skyliner. This is the newest form of Disney transportation on Walt Disney World property. And the Skyliner is really just like a gondola transportation system, and it runs between Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and then 4 different resorts: Caribbean Beach, the Riviera, Art of Animation, and Pop Century. The gondola cars are all decked out with like your favorite Disney characters from movies and shows and the parks. They're adorable and brightly colored and super fun. So that is a big draw for the Skyliner. And it is also the fastest way to travel between Epcot and Hollywood Studios. And it's also the fastest way to travel between those resorts and Epcot and Hollywood Studios. So it's a great option. I really like the Skyliner. I think it is super fun. And it's one of those things that, at least with my family, has become kind of like a quintessential part of our Disney trip is like, we have to ride the Skyliner, right? We have to ride the monorail and we have to ride the Skyliner. Those are like 2 things that my kids always request to do when we go. Something to note if you are taking the Skyliner to Epcot, the entrance that it takes you to is the International Gateway entrance. It is not the front entrance by Spaceship Earth. It is between the UK and France pavilion on that side of the International Gateway on that side of World Showcase. Also keep in mind that if you are trying to do transportation hopping or resort hopping or just exploring the property and Disney World in general, you cannot get between the Epcot monorail station and the Epcot Skyliner station without going through the park. This is something that trips a lot of people up because they assume, like Hollywood Studios, you can get between the buses and the Skyliner and all that, no problem. It's all out in the front of the park. But with Epcot, it is not, because that Skyliner station does take you to International Gateway. In order to get to the monorail, you have to go through the park. So if you've got a ticket that day that can get you in and go through the park, fabulous, great, no problem. But if you don't have a park ticket for the day, or you don't have a park hopper and Epcot's not your park for the day, you need to find a different way to get where you're trying to go. So just something to keep in mind, because that can be really tricky when people are trying to navigate places like the Boardwalk or Yacht and Beach, Swan and Dolphin, any of those resorts that are in that space right outside of the International Gateway entrance can be a little tricky with that. With the Skyliner, Caribbean Beach is the main hub. So most of the lines that you're taking to get where you need to go, you are going to need to switch lines at that time. So there are three main lines for the Skyliner. One of them runs from Epcot to the Riviera to Caribbean Beach. And then at Caribbean Beach, you would have to get off to get on a different line. The second line is Hollywood Studios to Caribbean Beach. So again, when you get to Caribbean Beach, you're going to hop off. And then the other one is Pop Century and Art of Animation. They share a Skyliner hub, and that one takes you again directly to Caribbean Beach. So all of those lines, let's say you're trying to get from Hollywood Studios to Epcot, you're going to have to go Hollywood Studios to Caribbean Beach, hop off, get on the other line to then go through the Riviera to get to Epcot. If you're starting at Art of Animation and you want to get to Hollywood Studios, you're going to you're going to get on at Art of Animation, get off at Caribbean Beach, hop on the other line to get to Hollywood Studios. So there's typically going to be a swap over, unless you're staying at Caribbean Beach, and then you're just lucky because you can hop on any of those three and you only have to do one line to get to where you're trying to go. As far as the travel time goes, now this does vary sometimes with weather or things that happen, but from Caribbean Beach to Hollywood Studios is about 5 minutes. From Caribbean Beach to Epcot, because you have to go through the Riviera, is about 12 minutes. And then Caribbean Beach to Pop Century and Art of Animation, again, is about 5 minutes. So really fast option. The biggest unknown about this transportation system is how long is the line waiting waiting to get on the line you need to get on. So if you're starting at Pop, you have to go to Caribbean Beach. How long is the line at Caribbean Beach to get to Hollywood Studios? That's going to be the biggest variable in your travel time, but generally speaking, the lines move super fast. The Skyliner is a continually moving transportation option, so that really helps with those lines as well. The Skyliner typically starts running about 60 minutes before Epcot and Hollywood Studios open for early entry. If you're staying at a Skyliner resort, I would go the night before your first park day and double check. They're going to have a sign outside of the Skyliner station that has the hours for the upcoming days. So I would go and double check that, because the morning time at any of those resorts, especially like Pop Century, Art of Animation, that line gets crazy long. So you want to make sure that you are in line, ready to go, so that way you don't have to wait 40 minutes just to get on the Skyliner. Now, like I said, it typically moves very quickly. It's usually not a huge deal, but that line can get very, very long. The Skyliner typically runs for about 90 minutes after Epcot and Hollywood Studios close, but if there are extended evening hours or like events or things like that, it may stay open longer, but you're going to want to just double check that before you get stranded, because occasionally the Skyliner will still close at normal time and they'll provide buses instead. So like that's really important to know, especially if you're at an extra magic hour event at Epcot. You need to know which exit to use to be able to get back to your resort. So definitely double check with that. Ask the people working the Skyliner or ask at guest relations and they can help you out with that. The Skyliner does close for inclement weather. So this is one that is a little bit tricky with the Skyliner. Primarily lightning and heavy rain will close it, but occasionally strong winds will close it as well. And it does often go down for routine maintenance in January. So they have already announced a refurb for the Disney Skyliner in January of 2027. So it will be closed from the 24th through the 30th of January. So like that last week, it will be closed for refurb. So something to keep in mind. And that's typically normal. They went an extra year this time. It had been closing like yearly in January, but they didn't close it this past year for whatever reason. So, but January 2027, it does have already a down period for maintenance for that. Resorts with the Skyliner access, something else to keep in mind is they do not run buses to Epcot and studios. So if you're staying at Caribbean Beach, your only option to get to Epcot and studios is the Skyliner. Same with Riviera, Pop Century, and Art of Animation. They will not run buses unless the Skyliner is down, and then they will run the buses to help get people where they need to go. So if the weather is looking a little questionable, you will still be able to get to and from where you're trying to go. It just may not be via the Skyliner. So you may have to backtrack a little to get to the bus stop if that becomes an issue with weather for that. A couple notes for my parents visiting and planning to take the Skyliner. There is no air conditioning in the Skyliner, but they do have a good breeze. Be sure to open the windows if they are not open. They have these little handles along the top, and there are at least one on every long side of the Skyliner up at the top that you can, like, pull down and push out to open up the windows to vent that. Because then once you get flowing, there's usually a nice breeze in there, and it's not a huge deal. The only other issue is if you get stopped, because from time to time, the Skyliner will stop. Even if you're on it and it's running perfectly normal, sometimes they have to unload and load cars. Sometimes people may need help getting in and out of the Skyliner, so they will stop it on occasion. So if you do stop, it can get a little warm in there. So maybe have your handheld fans ready just in case you need them. Each gondola of the Skyliner can hold up to 10 guests or 6 guests if you are traveling with somebody with a wheelchair or ECV. Single strollers and inline double strollers can roll right on and do not need to be folded up. That is a huge benefit. Now, if you have a side-by-side stroller where there are 2 seats next to each other, those will have to be folded up in the same way that they do for the buses. So just be ready for that. Again, be prepared to divide and conquer the best that you can. If you're traveling with littles, they will definitely need a hand to hold to help them get on and off of the Skyliner because, like I said, it is a continually moving transportation system. Those gondolas do not stop. So you definitely are going to want to have a hand on them. Even my 7 and 9-year-olds, especially my 7-year-old, I will grab her hand and make sure that she's all good getting on because it can be a little wobbly when you have to step onto a moving gondola from a stationary platform. So just be prepared for that. One other note about the gondola movement is as you are coming into the station, wherever you're headed, if it's Epcot, Caribbean Beach, Hollywood Studios, any of those, they come in fast. Don't be alarmed. It's a little bit jarring, though, because they do come in fast and then they hit the brakes as you approach the station. That is perfectly normal, so just brace yourself for that as you approach. Again, the Skyliner system does have seats that are forward and backward facing, like we talked about for the monorail. So be aware of that. If you've got somebody that's like, I cannot go backwards, make sure they get on the correct side of the gondola whenever you are loading. And just a note, if you're staying at Caribbean Beach and you want to know what areas are the closest to the Skyliner, Jamaica, Barbados, the Trinidad Pirate Rooms, and Aruba. Aruba has access to the Riviera station, but the other 3 are all going to be your closest options to the Caribbean Beach station of the Skyliner over there. Couple more options for transportation here. The next one is let's talk about ride share on property. So this would be your Uber or your Lyft. These are all readily available all around Disney property. They function just like they do in outside of the Disney bubble in the quote unquote normal world. Every park has a ride share drop off area, so they're going to have a designated space that you can go to meet your rideshare or to get dropped off by your rideshare. Most of the parks are out near the parking lot or the bus areas. But Magic Kingdom is at the TTC. So there is no ride share, except I'll get that in a second. But the typical ride share option for Uber and Lyft drops you off at the TTC. So then from there, you have to get on one of the other transportation options that we talked about a little bit ago. Parent notes about the rideshare option. This is a great option for getting somewhere at rope drop and for getting across property for like dining reservations. So I talked about there's no direct resort to resort transportation like buses. So Uber and Lyft are a really good way if you need to get across property for a dining reservation and you don't want to have to leave an hour and a half in advance to make sure that you're not late. My only issue with this is car seats can be a concern. So if you are a family that's got littles that need to be in a car seat, that can be a concern because Uber and Lyft, while they do have those options, they're not always super reliable. And it may take longer for you to be able to get a driver that has access to those car seats for you. But I have a solution if you have the budget for it. And that solution is Minnie Vans. So when I say Minnie Vans, I'm not talking about the one parked in my garage right now. I'm talking about Minnie, Minnie Mouse, Minnie Vans. These are adorable lift cars and SUVs that are painted like Minnie Mouse's infamous red and white polka dotted skirt. They are adorable. You will see them all across property. They are so much fun. With these, though, if you need a car seat, these include up to 2 complimentary car seats if needed, and those are required for children under 6 years of age per Florida law. So if you've got kiddos that are 3, 4, 5 and need a car seat, the minivans will come equipped with up to 2 included in every single one that you book. The other thing to note about the minivans is they do have more of a prioritized drop-off location than your standard lift cars do because they are run through Lyft but by Disney. So, for example, at Magic Kingdom, the standard Lyft drop off is at the TTC. The minivan drop off is inside of the bus stop drop offs. So it is right there with the buses. It's actually like the front and corner, very first bus stop at Magic Kingdom that you come to is the minivan one. So definitely prioritized there. Same thing goes for the other parks where they will have spaces usually within the bus area that they're going to pick up and drop off. So it's going to be a lot closer than your standard rideshare options. This was something else that I found interesting about the minivans that I didn't know because I'd never looked into them. Minivans are typically not in my budget, and I usually just take Disney transportation and just kind of hope for the best timing wise. But minivans do also have ECV and wheelchair accessible vans, which is so great for anybody that's traveling with somebody with an ECV across property and you don't want to take a bus. The minivans can help with that. So with the minivans, they have seating for 5 people. They do still have 1 complimentary car seat, which can be used by one of the 5 passengers. So that number is included in the 5. And then they have 2 spaces for mobility devices. And with these vans, the guests may actually remain in their mobility device for the duration of the ride. So similar to the buses in that, they can just wheel on, they park them, they get them all secured and situated, but then they can just stay in their ECV or wheelchair for the duration of your ride. So minivans are a super fun option now. They do come at a cost, right? A standard lift and a minivan are not going to be the same cost for your party to get where you're trying to go. So just look at it as an option. Again, prioritized drop off and pickup locations, and those car seats are the 2 main draws, and they're just super fun and cute to look at and to get to drive in while you're at Disney. So another option again there. And like I said, the ride share options are really just your standard ride share when it comes to navigating across the Disney parks. So the last thing I want to talk about with our Disney transportation explained for families is not really an external transportation system. It's your own 2 feet. So let's talk about walking paths because there are actually a few areas of Disney World Resort where you can walk between resorts and parks or parks and parks or resort to resort. So let's talk about those because there may be a better option for you rather than having to wait on a bus if you're in a group that is able to walk these distances. So, over in the Magic Kingdom area, The first one that I wanna talk about is the walkway between the Contemporary and Magic Kingdom. This one I feel like is utilized a lot and is fairly well advertised, and a lot of people know about it. So this is exactly what it sounds like. You walk from right inside the security actually to the Contemporary, and you're gonna walk directly by the bus stops at the Contemporary. So if you're already at the bus or you know where the bus stops are because you're staying there, walk past them down that sidewalk. You're gonna pass some parking lots. You're gonna have to cross the road at the crosswalk. There's lights and all that good stuff. But the nice thing about this one is this pathway actually includes a designated security stop. So you don't have to go through the busier park entrance bag checks. You can go through this smaller one if you're coming from the Contemporary. They'll check your bags, you'll go through the metal detector, and then you can go straight to the tap styles to get in. So that's a benefit of that. And it's not a long walk. It with kids, it maybe took us 10 minutes when we took it with our kids before. If you've got adults or teens, it's a little bit shorter than that. And there's hardly ever a line at that security stop. So that's a really great option for that. Another one that you can walk is from the Grand Floridian to Magic Kingdom. So this is a relatively newer path. They were doing some construction and things on it in the past months here, but it is open. It'll take you about 20 minutes to walk. And it's very scenic with like Florida wildlife, right? There's not a ton to look at. You're not walking through parking lots and crossing roads this way. It's much more of a scenic, woodsy style walk if that is something that you want to do. The other one in the Magic Kingdom area is the Polynesian. So from the Polynesian, you can actually walk two different places. You can walk to the Grand Floridian, so you can walk in between both of those. They're nice and close to each other. And then you can also walk from the Polynesian to the TTC. So this path is kind of a combination of the Polynesian's like internal walkways that walk just through the resort that then connect directly to the TTC. The most direct trip from the front of the Great Ceremonial House of the Polynesian to the TTC is about a third of a mile. So it's really not that far. So if you want to, especially like if you're at the Polynesian and you want to get to Epcot, I would walk to the TTC and then hop on the Epcot monorail because otherwise, if you're at the Polynesian and you're wanting to get to Epcot, you are going to have to go Polynesian, Grand Floridian, Magic Kingdom, Contemporary, and then the TTC. So it's going to be a much bigger time saver if you're able to walk. Now, if you're not able to walk, then just go to the monorail and do the normal quote unquote pathway. But highly suggest looking at that pathway if you are trying to get to Epcot from the Polynesian. In the Epcot and Hollywood Studios area, there's a lot of the different resorts that are outside of the World Showcase International Gateway entrance that you can walk from. So, walking from that area is called Crescent Lake. So, walking from the Crescent Lake resorts to Epcot, so that would be Yacht Club, Beach Club, Boardwalk, Swan, Swan Reserve, and Dolphin are all walkable distance to Epcot. Same thing with those resorts to studios. However, it's a lot longer of a walk to studios. All of those resorts are fairly well under a mile to get to Epcot. If you look at the Boardwalk, Yacht Club, Beach Club, those are really close. Swan and Dolphin are the further ones out, but like Yacht Club, Boardwalk, Beach Club, super close to Epcot. All of those, though, are going to be at least a mile to get to Hollywood Studios. It is walkable, it's just quite a bit further to get there. Same thing for walking from Hollywood Studios to Epcot. Hollywood Studios front gate and Epcot's back gate, International Gateway, are connected via all those Epcot area resort paths. This is the longest walk in that area, and it is over a mile. So it is like 1.25 miles to get between the two, but it is walkable. If the Skyliner goes down for some reason other than weather, you're not going to want to walk this in a thunderstorm, or you want to go on a walk to get some extra steps in because you didn't get enough in your park day, which if that's you, sure, that's fine. But if you want to get some extra steps, that is a fun pathway that you can take that walks you through several different resort areas and is really nice to kind of look around and see where everything's going. The other thing you could do is you could walk part of it and you could hop on the boat. We talked about the friendship boats earlier that take you from those same crescent lake areas to Hollywood Studios. So you could walk from Epcot to the boat, take the boat part of the way, and then walk the rest of the way. So lots of different combinations with that, if that's something that you want to look into. Just another note also from the Swan Reserve, and Dolphin, you can actually walk to the miniature golf course Fantasia Garden. So if that's something you want to do, because you're planning to do the mini golf anyway, that's probably a much better bet to get there than trying to navigate the buses and all of that to get to mini golf, because that's a whole nother complicated way to get there. But you can walk from Fantasia Gardens to Swan Reserve, and the Dolphin. Now, in the Disney Springs area, you can actually walk on a path from Disney Springs to Saratoga Springs. So the edge of Saratoga Springs actually has a designated walking path from the Congress Park section of the resort. And that is the best way to get to Disney Springs if you're on that side of the resort. Now, Saratoga Springs is a massive resort. So if you're not on that side, probably not the fastest way to get there, because it would be a significantly further walk to just get to Congress Park to then be able to get to Disney Springs. So I would look at one of the other options for transportation if you're going from one of the other sections of Saratoga Springs to get to Disney Springs. And then as far as walking goes, you can also walk between several resorts, like I mentioned earlier. Fort Wilderness and Wilderness Lodge are very easy to walk in between. Art of Animation and Pop Century are literally across the bridge from each other, super easy to walk in between. Same thing with Port Orleans Riverside and Port Orleans French Quarter. They basically sit almost touching each other. They're almost like one big resort over there. And that one is absolutely beautiful to walk through if you're looking for a nice scenic stroll to take. And then same thing for Caribbean Beach and Riviera, which shouldn't surprise you given that they both have access to the Skyliner. You can easily walk between the two of those. Now, there are some other places that you can walk on Disney Resort property, but those are kind of the best options. I know there are several of the resorts, like the All-Star resorts, you can walk to the local McDonald's that's right there. So there are some other walking paths that you can take if you need to or choose to, but these are just the ones that I thought would be most helpful for people to take note of if you're staying at any of these places or want to resort hop between any of these places. Now, before we wrap today, just an overall general note about navigating around Disney property. The best way to navigate and figure out what transportation methods you have. If this is all too much, you can't remember it, you just need the tried and true simple way to figure out transportation. Use your My Disney Experience app. The map feature on that app has direction options, or you can also access the directions through searching for like key places at the location you're trying to get to. So let's say, for example, you're at Magic Kingdom and you know that you want to go to Fort Wilderness. If I go on My Disney Experience and I start at the train station, okay? I start at the train station. See how when I click the train station, I'm going to say get directions. So I'm going to get directions, and then I'm going to flip this so I'm starting at the railroad station. And then I'm going to type in here, Fort Wilderness. And then I'm just going to pick like, okay, let's look. I want to get to Tri-Circle D Ranch because I want to go see the horses over there. So now this is showing me all of the options that I have. It's showing me if I want to take a bus. It's showing me up at the top if I want to take a boat, if I want to take the monorail. And you can click through the different options and it will show you what to do to get to where I need to go. So that is the best way that I would suggest doing it. You can also search, like let's say I want to get to Primo Piatto, which is the quick service restaurant at the Riviera. If I'm on that page, I also have a get directions option on there as well. So I click get directions, and let's say I'm staying at All Star Music. So I'm staying at All Star Music. I want to get to Primo Piatto. This is showing me the options that I need to do. So it's telling me to, from the All Stars, take a bus to Hollywood Studios and then jump on the Skyliner. So then it's also showing if I want to do all buses, because I don't want to do the Skyliner, it's telling me bus to Animal Kingdom, because that's the closest park. And then from Animal Kingdom, bus to the Riviera. So that is the best way to figure out your transportation needs and options. You can also ask the concierge at your resort. If you say, hey, I'm trying to get here, what is my best option to get there? They're going to be able to give you that information as well. The thing to note about that and about all of these different transportation options are time and convenience are the main two things to consider when traveling across Disney property, right? How much time do I have to get where I'm trying to go? And how convenient is it? Do I have to take 4 bus routes or can I just hop on the Skyliner to get to where I need to go, right? So all of those things are things to keep in mind when you're looking at transportation. Hopefully, all of the information that I gave you today was helpful so that way you have a little bit of a better grasp on what locations have what kind of transportation and how can I get from this resort to this resort and this park to this resort. So, hopefully, this at least gave you a better understanding of some of that. If you still need help and you're like, I'm so lost, how do I get here from there? I'm trying to plan for my trip in the fall and I don't know where I'm going. Send me a message. You can always find me momstreetusa@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me at Mom Street USA on any of our social media platforms. Again, Patreon is a great way to send me a message over there as well. Coming up next on Mom Street USA, we are going to be talking about 5 things I wish I knew before visiting Walt Disney World. So, hoping to give you my 5 best tips when it comes to visiting Disney. But for now, that is the end of this episode. Thank you all so much for being here for this episode of Mom Street USA. Thank you all for supporting and sharing and commenting and hanging out and being here. You are all so appreciated, and I will see you on the next episode of Mom Street USA. Bye, everyone.